Today, we're diving into the wild evolution of American self-propelled guns during World War II. Now, these are basically big cannons bolted onto a vehicle chassis, right? Designed to keep up with a war that was moving faster than anyone imagined. But this isn't just a boring list of trucks with guns. Oh no, this is a story about a desperate, high-stakes race to solve a deadly problem. A race fueled by fear, raw innovation, and some really brutal lessons learned on the battlefield.
So, let's set the scene. It's France, May 1940. The German blitzkrieg is just rolling over the Allied lines. And for French Lieutenant Colonel Pierre Lauberté, it was a nightmare. I mean, you can feel the desperation in his words, can't you? This complete helplessness, watching waves of German tanks come at you when you just don't have the right tools to fight back. His soldiers were sitting ducks, his tanks were outgunned, and the result was an absolute catastrophe.
And that was the question, wasn't it? Back in the US, the Army was watching this unfold in horror. They saw what happened to France, and they knew they had to figure out a different way, and fast. The answer they came up with was pretty radical. It all started with an idea, a doctrine, that was born completely out of fear.
Right, so the sight of those panzers just tearing things up led to this really controversial idea. The Army thought, okay, instead of just building better tanks, what if we create an entirely new branch, a specialized force with one job and one job only, to hunt and kill enemy tanks? It was a brand new concept, and believe me, not everyone was on board.
So what exactly was this tank destroyer doctrine? Well, the key thing to get here is that it wasn't defensive. This wasn't about hiding in the bushes and waiting for a tank to drive by. No, this was an aggressive, offensive idea. These units were supposed to be fast, hard-hitting, and their job was to actively seek out the enemy's armor. Think of them like the cavalry, but for hunting tanks. It was a bold idea, but some people worried it was just too specialized for the messiness of a real war.
But look, a doctrine is just a bunch of words on paper if you don't have the hardware. And by 1941, with war breathing down everyone's neck, the US needed these tank destroyers like yesterday. So the first attempts were pretty much just frantic experiments on wheels. They were literally just grabbing any gun they could find, any truck or chassis available, and slapping them together.
And yeah, these first attempts were clumsy, to say the least. You had the M3, which took a French artillery piece from the 1890s. I'm not kidding, a gun over 40 years old, and put it on a half-track. Then you had the M6, which put a tiny, already obsolete 37mm gun on a regular Dodge truck. I mean, can you imagine? Against modern German tanks, these things were just useless. They had no real firepower and offered basically zero protection to their crews. It was a harsh lesson. You can't just put a gun on a truck and call it a tank killer. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, as they say, no plan survives contact with the enemy. All that theory went out the window, and these machines hit the dirt in North Africa. This is where the real evolution begins, because the battlefield has a way of forcing you to get smart, real fast. Now, ironically, the first design that was a massive success wasn't even a tank destroyer. It was this, the M7 Howitzer Motor Carriage. It wasn't designed to snipe tanks with high-velocity shells. It was a mobile sledgehammer, lobbing huge 105mm high-explosive shells to support the infantry. They put it on a proven tank chassis so it could keep up with the advance, and boom, they had a winner. The British nicknamed it the Priest because of that machine gun ring that kind of looks like a pulpit. And this thing, it became absolutely essential.
And that number right there, 4,316, that tells you everything you need to know. That's how many of these M7 Priests were built. This wasn't some rare, specialized vehicle. This was the workhorse. It was everywhere, providing critical fire support in every major theater of the war.
But then came this guy, the M10, nicknamed the Wolverine. Okay, now we're talking. This was the first vehicle that actually delivered on the promise of the tank destroyer doctrine. It had a powerful 3-inch gun, and crucially, it was in a turret that could spin all the way around. Plus, it was fast, and its armor was sloped to help deflect shells. For the very first time, the US had a proper, purpose-built tank hunter.
So as the war dragged on, the battlefield got way more complicated. The threat wasn't just other tanks anymore. Now you had to worry about attacks from the sky, and that meant you needed a whole new kind of specialist vehicle to keep your troops safe.
Think about it. As the Allied armies pushed forward, you had these massive, long columns of trucks and soldiers. For the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, these were juicy targets. So to protect them, the Army needed mobile anti-aircraft guns. Their first serious go at it was the M13, which stuck two heavy .5 caliber machine guns on the back of a half-track.
And here we see that theme again.
rapid, constant improvement. The M13 was a decent idea, but the thinking was pretty simple. If 2 guns are good, 4 have to be better, right? So it was almost immediately replaced by the M16. Same basic concept, just double the firepower. It created this terrifying wall of lead that became the go-to mobile anti-aircraft vehicle for the US.
But let's be real, the biggest threat was still on the ground, and it was getting bigger and meaner. By late 1944, Germany was rolling out its new heavy tanks, the infamous Panther and the Tiger. Suddenly, the M10's trusty 3-inch gun, which had been so great, was really starting to struggle to punch through that thick German steel.
This was it. This was the ultimate test. The entire tank destroyer idea was created for this exact moment, to take on German tanks. But now, it looked like the German tanks had leaped ahead. The whole doctrine was on the line. What in the world could stop these monsters?
The answer was the M36, the Jackson, and the solution they came up with was just brilliant. The engineers did something really clever. They took a massive 90mm anti-aircraft gun, a weapon designed to hit fast-moving planes way up in the sky, and they figured out how to mount it in a new turret on the M10 chassis. The result was a cannon with insane velocity and penetrating power. This was it. This was the only American vehicle that could reliably take on a Panther or a Tiger from a distance and win.
So, after all that, this incredible whirlwind of wartime innovation, what was the final verdict? What was the legacy of America's great tank hunting experiment? Before we get to the verdict, you have to understand the sheer scale of what was happening behind the scenes. Just look at that number. From 1937 to 1944, American factories churned out over 88,000 armored fighting vehicles. It's just a staggering number, and that incredible industrial power is what made this whole story of rapid evolution even possible. And that brings us to the great paradox of this whole story. The vehicles themselves, the M10, the M36, the M7 Priest, they were a huge success. I mean, they were absolutely invaluable on the battlefield, and a lot of them kept serving for decades after the war. But the doctrine, the big idea that created them in the first place, it was tossed in the garbage can the second the war was over.
So why? Well, the war taught a very clear, very painful lesson. Splitting up the jobs of tank and tank destroyer was a bad idea. It was inefficient. You shouldn't need a whole separate unit to protect your tanks from other tanks. The real solution was to just give your own tanks a gun that was big enough to kill anything they might run into. In the end, every tank had to become its own tank destroyer.
When you look back, the story of the tank destroyer branch is just this fascinating lesson in adaptation. It shows how a single idea, even a flawed one that's born out of pure fear, can kickstart this incredible burst of creativity and technological progress. The doctrine itself didn't make it, but the amazing vehicles it created were absolutely crucial to winning the war. It really makes you wonder, what other amazing breakthroughs are just waiting out there, ready to be discovered when the pressure is on and we're forced to innovate or fail.